Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's show, farm business specialist Tom Curran explains the common mistakes and key traits to make a successful farm partnership. And I first asked Tom about the various farm structures operating in Ireland.
Collaborative farming structures are basically arrangements that farmers work together in. So included in that would be your farm partnership model, which is around 2002, where farmers share profits from the one business. Cow leasing, where a farmer with surplus cows or leases them out to somebody who maybe can't get finance to buy cows. You have share farming, which is slightly different to the partnership, where again, two people enter into the arrangement together and they calculate their separate profits from it. And contract rearing, I suppose, essentially is an arrangement where the dairy farmer looks to another farmer to rear his replacement heifers for him.
And you mentioned that, different structures have been in action in Ireland since 2002. What would you see as the most common business structures you encounter?
The partnerships are the most common. There's about 2,500 on the department register, but there's also a lot of unregistered partnerships out there, including between family and other farmers as well.
And you mentioned contract rearing and cow leasing, and they're relatively new concepts to the dairy industry. How did these arrangements come about in Ireland?
The cow leasing, I suppose we're adapting maybe structures that exist elsewhere. So certainly contract rearing would have been done around Europe and in New Zealand. Maybe around the mid-2000s, the template agreements were generated by Teagasc and booklets and farm walks to promote the concept. And the uptake was quite slow initially. But I think where we are now in the dairy industry with the labour demands on dairy farmers, the cost of leasing extra land and that contract rearing is taking hold. And on the other side, for the rearers, there's a growing acceptance that this is a little bit more profitable than other enterprises. So we have farmers maybe engaging in it or looking to get into it. And
if we take a closer look at contract rearing, in your mind, give us an example of a case that you've worked with, how it has worked.
I suppose a case that I've worked with, two farmers, the arrangement has been going for the last 7 or 8 years. The dairy farmer, why did he consider it? He considered it because it allowed him on a limited land base to increase his output of milk, his profitability. It reduced his labour demand, so he's expanded his cow numbers and held his efficiency. But in that arrangement, the rearer was an ex-dairy farmer who had been in beef and wasn't happy with the performance of the beef and the the suitability of the animals for his land type and so on. So he they got talking on a show committee of all things about maybe the possibility of rearing calves, and from that spawned the contract rearing arrangement. So in that particular case, the calves moved to the rearer at 4 weeks of age, and the milk replacer is provided by the dairy farmer, and the rearer and his wife carried them right through to 2 years of age, or the winter just before they calved down, and they return back to the dairy farmer. The dairy farmer does the AI, and the rearer does all the other aspects of it.
And what sort of cost would you be talking about, say, per day would it cost for that kind of arrangement?
The important thing about contract rearing is that there are different costs. So if you take the calf rearing stage up to 10 to 12 weeks of age, it's very labour intensive and there's a lot of veterinary and housing costs. So the costing for that period is probably up on €2 a day to €2.50. If you take then the first grazing season with calves going to grass, you're probably talking about maybe 90 cent or thereabouts. And then, as you go through the winters, obviously there's the provision of silage and housing. So the winters have a higher cost than the grazing seasons. The first winter, as weanling calves, maybe 250 to 300 kilos, you're talking about a cost maybe around 150 to 180 a day. And then the second grazing season back down to maybe €1 to €1.10. So the thing to be careful about quoting costs is the it depends on who's paying for what. So in some situations, the dairy farmer pays for a lot of veterinary costs, plus the AI and vaccinations, those type of things, and in some cases meals. So all of that has to be factored in. But if you take it as a rule of thumb, where maybe the dairy farmer is covering AI and vaccinations, the general cost that I would see going from a weaned calf to maybe the November before they calve down, about 130 to 135 a day is what the rearer needs to be getting to make a margin out of it. And I think the realization is there with dairy farmers now that, if you want the heifers well reared, and you want the arrangement to be sustainable and long term, you need to be paying somewhere in that order.
And if we consider, it's contract rearing, so there's a contract essentially between a dairy farmer and somebody who rears the stock for him. Yeah. What's important to include in that contract?
Well, first of all, to identify the parties, to agree a rate per day and state it in it, to set up the payment structure. Normally it's by direct debit directly into the rearer's account, so that's all catered for. The animals involved, what animals, so maybe the tag numbers of the animals will be identified in the contract, and how they deal with breeding, the provision of AI, whether they're going to be synchronized, how stock bulls are, if there's bulls in to cover up afterwards, how that's dealt with. All of that needs to be included in the contract.
And then to pick up, you mentioned cow leasing, and often farmers are intending on expanding and they want these cows maybe in 2-3 years time. Again, can you give us a case study of where you've seen this work in practice?
So I suppose if you look at cows, the probably the biggest cost in a dairy farm is rearing replacement heifers, something a lot of dairy farmers underestimate. So if a farmer is expanding, and for one reason or another, in previous years it would have been milk quota limited his ability, but now with quotas gone, it's more than likely land or possibly labour. But if you generate these extra animals, you have a lot of money tied up in them, and you have no return on them till they start milking. So we see a lot of farmers maybe that are seeking opportunities, maybe to lease a farm from a retiring dairy farmer or whatever. But in order to build the stock up and have the stock ready for that, getting a financial return on those stock is where leasing kicks in. That it's not comparable to a milking cow, but certainly if you're receiving maybe 10 to 15% of the value of that cow in a lease fee on year, that's giving you a financial return on those animals, and you can call on those maybe when an opportunity has been identified or suitable opportunity for a second unit or whatever.
And you mentioned maybe 10 to 15% of the value of the cow. What dictates that?
It's the general figure that's out there. I would say in some cases it's probably higher, but that seems to be what people are paying per year. So maybe at 15% it's roughly around €200 for a cow worth 1,500 or thereabouts. So that type of figure is being paid, and more in some cases, depending on the EBI, the cow, and the potential for milk solids and so on. But why, I suppose, on the other side of the coin, the main reason people would lease in cows, generally it's maybe a young farmer who has a limited ability to get capital, so they may be able to buy maybe 50 cows, but have the farm to generate cash and to generate income in the business. It's financially feasible to lease in maybe whatever cows they need to stock the farm adequately, and that's where we would see it maybe happening. Yeah.
And in terms then, if say for argument's sake, I have 100 cows and I'm going to lease them to you. What other factors are there besides the value that you pay for the cow?
So there's two things. The first thing you have to decide, are you going to lease those cows on a short-term basis for a year or two, or are you going to lease them on a longer-term basis for 4 or 5 years? So the first thing that strikes you there is if it's a year or two, you're going to get your same cows back minus any replacements. So if you factor in maybe a 20% replacement rate, which would be fairly standard, so the person leasing the cows from you is going to return your original group of cows. Maybe if it's for 2 years, there'll be 40% of those animals that will have been generated on the leased farm, if you like. And obviously the other 60 cows will be the same, or cows that you had originally. So the issues you need to factor in there are the EBI of the cows, or what is the EBI gain that you want to achieve. do you want them in calf coming back, and when do you want them to calve? So all of those issues need to be written into the agreement, that along with the payment, that the cows involved, what are the criteria around any replacements that come in, and the calving and so on. And also maybe disease status in relation to vaccinations and things like that. Obviously, if it's a long-term arrangement for 5 years or more, you're not going to get the same cows back. But again, you need to set out the criteria. So if you lease out 100 cows and there's 20 first to fifth lactation in each category, well, you want to get 100 cows back. But if it's 5 years' time, do you want maybe the animals you get back should be €25 higher in EBI than the ones you originally leased out? And when do you want them to calve? You need to specify the criteria around calving as well.
And then if we turn our attention to, say, partnerships, and if we take a particular look at farm partnerships, what are the typical things you see within farm partnerships, say, today?
So, as I said earlier, there's 2,500 or thereabouts on the department register. There are a lot more, an unquantified number outside of that, maybe, that aren't registered with the Department of Agriculture. The 90% of the partnerships are family, and I suppose that's a positive in a sense that it's a really good business structure where there is a successor in place to bring that successor formally into the farm business, and that's really the route that's been there, and the incentives kind of structured around that to encourage successors in at an earlier stage. So what we'd like is maybe a student that has returned home after completing education or a number of years of experience or travel, when they're at home, that instead of just being a labour unit on the farm with no formal role, that they're formally in the business in terms of the finance, in terms of the herd number, and so on. And that I suppose, why are we promoting that? Because it allows that person to gain experience over a longer period of time to gain confidence in their ability to farm, but also allows maybe the parent the ability to step back gradually from the management of the farm. And really what you want to achieve in that partnership is a role reversal over its lifetime, where the young farmer comes in and swaps places with their parents over the period of time, and it's proved very successful since 2002. That's what we've seen with partnerships in that regard. That and the commentary through research that we've done has shown that it has been a really good transitional structure between the two generations. I suppose 15 to 20% of the partnerships are between farmers, so people that have amalgamated their business, and they. While the business must be economical and viable to provide two incomes from a household, or to two household incomes, the key reason why farmers have done it, they've identified, is lifestyle, to work-life balance, to have more labour available to two farmers working together. It cuts out a lot of duplication in terms of the routine tasks that are on dairy farms are the same in every farm. But you have a lot more labour efficiency. So a typical example in a dairy farm would be one farmer milks the cows in the morning, the other farmer feeds the calves or sets up the grass or whatever needs to be done during the time of the year. So that's where the benefit is. And for larger jobs, then there's two able labour units there. So lifestyle, I suppose, is a key driver identified by people in partnership. But another key feature that I would have seen is that it's very difficult. The notion of say matching farmers together to engage in something like a partnership is difficult, because the relationship between them is the key success factor. And what I would have seen as a feature of successful partnerships is that by and large the farmers already worked together or knew each other previously, and there was a high level of trust maybe there, and from there they developed maybe a formal partnership. Whereas the notion of putting two strangers together is a lengthy process, in my view, in that by the time they get to know each other, trust each other, and realise that they want the same things, that can be quite a long process. Yeah.
So you've kind of led me on to my next question, Tom. I was just going to ask you about, when you're starting or considering starting these partnerships, what are the key things you should look at to set yourself up?
So if we take two farmers thinking of amalgamating, first of all, they need to get an appreciation of where they're at, in terms of the system that they operate, how how is it possible to gel the two farms together? Everything, there are slight differences in farms. If people are on the same page, then we'll say the business model can work. So that would be the first thing. Just really, it's a personal thing, their ability to work together. How well do they work together? How well do they take criticism? How well are they willing to hold up their hand and say when they're wrong? What sort of personality do they have, and is that compatible with working with somebody? So if you take partnership, it's quite intense. They don't have to be working in each other's pockets all day every day, but it's quite an intense relationship at the same time. I suppose when I mention the word relationship, I don't mean that they have to be best friends, but they have to be able to work together in a business sense. And that's a key thing with the partnership. From there, if that works, then I think it's really a practical thing, looking at maybe doing what resources are available, what land is available, what buildings are available, and in terms of bringing the two businesses together, how do they do that? Do they need roadways? Do they need a better water structure? Do they need to increase cow accommodation or the milking parlour? All of these decisions. So the practical, physical plan of bringing the farms together, costings around that, and a business plan then to see, right, is this worth doing in the first place, or are we willing to put in extra capital to amalgamate the farms? And that's really where I would start, really, in terms of first of all, looking at the people involved and their relationship, and then secondly, the farm and how you'd amalgamate the two.
And then in terms of the family partnership, what sort of things should people consider in terms of having the conversation?
So I think in terms of the family, the first point would be, is the successor clearly identified? So if you take a typical family, there could be 3 or 4 children in the family. Is there a clear successor identified? And then the first question you'd ask, is that successor ready? Are they educated? Have they gained enough experience? Do they want to travel? All of these types of things. Are they at home working with the parents and making a significant contribution? And at that point, that's really when the partnership becomes relevant, because you want to encourage people to travel and gain experience outside of the home farm. So it's really after that period that they come in. From there, then, once they've made the decision to form the partnership, it's a process of starting to put it together. There is a clear process in terms of maybe discussing it with the accountant from a taxation point of view, discussing with the agricultural advisor, and I suppose a critical point here is actually income. Can the farm sustain the living requirements of the young person as well as the parents? So that all depends on the circumstances. So, if the parents still have dependents, then they need to maybe take a bigger slice of the cake. And then what are the circumstances of the successor? Are they, I suppose, young, free and single? Are they married? Have they commitments that require a greater level of income? And then you look at the farm business and say, right, can it sustain that? And if it can't, what do we need to do to provide the incomes involved? So that's a critical issue. I suppose the key thing about it then would be that the assets can remain in the ownership of the parents. They don't have to transfer anything, and that provides security to them, especially where they have other dependents. But it's also a structure then that can provide encouragement to the successor to get involved in a formal way. And again, it's an adjustment process. It's sort of moving the parents from being, or the relationship from being a parent, son or daughter relationship to being equal partners and involved in decision making. In terms of putting it together, it's talking with the agricultural advisor, talking with the accountant, and getting the necessary documentation from either the department website or the Teagasc website, and starting the process of putting that together.
And with all these arrangements, Tom, we must acknowledge that sometimes it doesn't always work out, and mistakes are made. Can you point out some mistakes that we can take learnings from for people who are thinking about engaging in any of these type of arrangements?
I suppose the ones that I'd be aware of that have broken down. First of all, people often jump to the conclusion that it's that the farmers fall out, and that's not necessarily always the case. It's important to realise that these arrangements will work for a period of time where they suit both parties. And you have to recognise that there is a lifetime in them. So I could give you 3 examples of partnerships I would be aware of that lasted very well for over 10 years, worked exceptionally well. In all three cases, the partnerships ended, but for three very different reasons and genuine reasons. In one case, there was a change in a significant change in the life of one of the partners, that he just reappraised his whole outlook in life, and decided he didn't want to be in the partnership any longer, and they ended the partnership, and they ended it amicably, and I'll come back to that, how they ended it, and that in a minute. The other one was where I suppose the key thing in terms of the arrangement would be communication, and I would say that the goals of the partnership weren't, the two partners left things drift on, and they didn't communicate. One person happy out with the situation, the other person not so happy, and they didn't communicate that well, and it was left to fester a little bit and reached a boiling point. But luckily, the two farmers, wanted to end it amicably. They didn't want hassle, but that's not always the case. So what it comes back to me is structure. Before you get into any of these arrangements, you need to realise that it could end at any point. So the exit strategy, or how you get out of it, is really important. And in terms of something like a partnership, which are long established, the key thing in that is the agreement, the written legal agreement. What does that say about your arrangement? And there are two critical structures in that. One is, how do you treat the assets, the land and the buildings and things like that you own? They're licensed in, or you give the partnership permission, so you don't transfer them. If the partnership ends, that's revoked and the assets returned. The other one then, and the critical one, is capital investment. So you're sharing profits, that's at one level in a partnership, but the capital you have invested in the business is really important in terms of the stock and the machinery that you put in, or any other capital that you put in terms of facilities and so on that the business uses. So that forms a key part of your exit strategy, because when something like a partnership ends, the assets return. What you divvy out between the partners is the physical assets. So potentially you could sell the cows and the machinery and whatever cash is available, pay any debts owed, and the remaining money that's there can be divided out. And it's divided out on the basis of what you first contributed or subsequently contributed. So that's, I suppose that's in terms of capital within a partnership. To me, that's your exit strategy, and how you go about getting out of it. And it may not still be easy, but at least you have a process to follow to get out of the arrangement. So I suppose the key thing for me is building that exit strategy in at the beginning before you get into the arrangement, and realising that it could end at any point. And secondly, the relationship, working and nurturing on the relationship between you and your business partners, communicating with them, being honest and open and trustworthy with them, all of those key things. If they're not there, the arrangement will never work out, and certainly will be harder to dissolve if there's animosity there, and that generally comes from poor communication.
And I suppose finally, Tom, you've mentioned communication, honesty, being trustworthy. Are there any other important traits that you think, people must possess when they're involved in partnerships like this?
Yeah, I think they need to be open to new ideas, being open to being maybe not always right, listening to other ideas, and realising that there's a benefit in discussing decisions to be made on the farm with other people, and that ultimately you can end up with a better decision because you've thrashed it around with somebody a bit more. That's a key thing. The personality, I suppose I would often say to people, it's well worth maybe doing a personality profile before you enter into an arrangement like this, to see where are the areas you need to improve on so that you can work with people. And there are people that just are not cut out for working with another person. But I think with a good structure and with an open-minded attitude, I think a lot of people can actually collaborate effectively. And then it really depends on the type of arrangement. So a partnership is quite intense, share farming is quite intense, leasing is a bit more distant, but it's still a collaborative arrangement. You still have a relationship with a landowner to manage. And also with contract rearing and cow leasing, there needs to be communication and decision making and the ability to work together, albeit at somewhat of a distance.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for Your Dairy Edge.